What if I told you that an idea born in the mind of a philosopher would go on to reshape half the world, affect billions of lives, and define the entire 20th century? This is the story of communism, an ideology that promised a workers' paradise, but delivered something very different. From the streets of 19th century Europe to the fall of the Berlin Wall, this is the complete history of communism. Our story begins in 1818, in the German city of Trier, where a boy named Karl Marx was born. Growing up in an era of unprecedented industrial growth, Marx witnessed something that would haunt him forever: the brutal exploitation of workers. Children as young as 5 working 16-hour days in factories, families living in disease-ridden slums, while factory owners built mansions. The Industrial Revolution had created immense wealth, but that wealth wasn't being shared. Marx became obsessed with a single question: why does society allow the many to suffer for the benefit of the few? After studying philosophy and economics, he believed he'd found the answer. It wasn't about bad people or corrupt governments, it was about the system itself. Capitalism, he argued, was fundamentally designed to exploit workers. In 1848, Marx and his collaborator Friedrich Engels published a pamphlet that would change history, the Communist Manifesto. Its opening line became legendary: "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism." The manifesto laid out a revolutionary vision. Marx argued that all of human history was a story of class struggle: masters versus slaves, lords versus serfs, and now capitalists versus workers. He predicted that capitalism would eventually collapse under its own contradictions, leading to a revolution where workers would seize the means of production, the factories, the land, the resources, and create a classless society where wealth was shared equally. For the next 70 years, Marx's ideas spread like wildfire among the working class. Socialist and communist parties formed across Europe. Workers organized into unions demanding better conditions. But Marx's prediction of an imminent revolution didn't happen in the industrialized nations of Western Europe as he expected. Instead, it happened in the last place anyone anticipated: Russia. By 1917, Russia was crumbling. World War I had devastated the nation. Millions of soldiers were dead, food was scarce, and the people were desperate. The Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, ruled as an absolute monarch, but his grip on power was slipping. Enter Vladimir Lenin, a devoted Marxist who had spent years in exile studying revolutionary theory. Lenin saw Russia's chaos as the perfect opportunity. He adapted Marx's ideas, arguing that a small group of dedicated revolutionaries, a vanguard party, could seize power and guide the working class to revolution. In October 1917, Lenin and his Bolshevik party launched a coup, storming the Winter Palace in Petrograd and overthrowing the provisional government. It was a pivotal moment in human history. For the first time, a communist government controlled a nation. What followed was the world's first attempt to build a communist state, and it would be written in blood. Lenin immediately faced opposition. Anti-communist forces, supported by Western nations, launched a civil war. The Russian Civil War lasted from 1918 to 1921 and killed millions. The Bolsheviks won, but Lenin used brutal tactics, executing dissidents, crushing protests, and establishing the secret police known as the Cheka.
When Lenin died in 1924, a power struggle erupted. The winner was Joseph Stalin, a man whose name would become synonymous with totalitarian terror.
Stalin transformed the Soviet Union through a series of 5-year plans, forcing rapid industrialization. Millions of peasants were forced into collective farms. Those who resisted were labeled Gulags, class enemies, and were either executed or sent to labor camps in Siberia, known as Gulags. The human cost was catastrophic. Stalin's policies led to the Holodomor, a man-made famine in Ukraine that killed between 3 to 5 million people in 1933. Entire villages starved, while the Soviet government seized their grain. But Stalin's paranoia went even further. In the Great Purge of 1936-1938, Stalin eliminated anyone he perceived as a threat. Old Bolsheviks who fought alongside Lenin, military generals, intellectuals, even ordinary citizens, millions were arrested, tortured into confessing to imaginary crimes, and executed or sent to die in labor camps. By 1939, Stalin had created a totalitarian state where the Communist Party controlled every aspect of life. The promised workers' paradise had become a nightmare of surveillance, propaganda, and fear. After World War II ended in 1945, the world entered a new era, the Cold War. The Soviet Union had helped defeat Nazi Germany and now occupied much of Eastern Europe. Stalin wasn't leaving. One by one, communist governments were established throughout Eastern Europe: Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and East Germany. Winston Churchill famously declared that an iron curtain had descended across Europe, dividing the communist East from the democratic West. But communism's spread didn't stop there. In 1949, Mao Zedong led communist forces to victory in China's civil war, establishing the People's Republic of China. With over 500 million people, China became the world's largest communist state. Mao launched ambitious programs to rapidly transform China. The Great Leap Forward, beginning in 1958, aimed to industrialize China overnight. Peasants were forced into communes and ordered to produce steel in backyard furnaces. The result was catastrophic. Massive crop failures led to the Great Chinese Famine, killing an estimated 15 to 55 million people between 1959 and 1961. It remains the deadliest famine in human history. Then came the Cultural Revolution in 1966. Mao mobilized young people into Red Guards to purge traditional culture and eliminate his political rivals. Teachers, intellectuals, and anyone associated with the old ways were publicly humiliated, beaten, or killed. Priceless cultural artifacts were destroyed. Schools closed for years. The Cultural Revolution created a generation of trauma. Meanwhile, communism spread to Korea, Vietnam, Cuba, and numerous African nations. By the 1970s, nearly 1/3 of the world's population lived under communist governments. By the 1970s, the communist world looked powerful from the outside, but internally, it was rotting. The Soviet economy, despite decades of 5-year plans, was stagnating. While the West experienced technological revolutions and rising living standards, Soviet citizens stood in long lines for basic goods. The command economy, where the government controlled all production, was inefficient and corrupt. Factory managers falsified reports, quality was abysmal, innovation was stifled. In Eastern Europe, resentment grew. The people had never chosen communism. It had been imposed by Soviet tanks. Uprisings erupted repeatedly. East Germany in 1953, Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968. Each time, Soviet forces crushed them brutally. But one uprising would change everything. In 1980, Polish workers at the Dansk shipyard formed an independent trade union called Solidarity. Led by an electrician named Lech Wałęsa, Solidarity became a mass movement of 10 million members, demanding freedom, democracy, and human rights. The Soviet Union's final leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, recognized the system was unsustainable. In 1985, he introduced 2 revolutionary policies: glasnost, meaning openness, and perestroika, meaning restructuring. He hoped to reform communism to make it work better. Instead, he unleashed forces that would destroy it. Glasnost allowed Soviet citizens to speak openly for the first time in decades. The floodgates opened. People discussed the Gulags, Stalin's crimes, the failures of the economy, the lies they'd been told. Once people could speak the truth, the system's legitimacy evaporated. 1989 was the year everything changed. It was the year communism collapsed. It started in Poland. In June, Solidarity won partially free elections in a landslide, forming the first non-communist government in the Eastern Bloc since the 1940s. The Soviet Union, under Gorbachev, chose not to intervene. That decision changed history. If the Soviets wouldn't use force to maintain communist governments, then those governments were doomed. In Hungary, the government began dismantling the barbed wire fence along its border with Austria. East Germans began fleeing through Hungary to the west, a trickle that became a flood. In October, massive peaceful protests erupted in East Germany. In Leipzig, 70,000 people marched chanting, "We are the people." The government hesitated. The crowds grew larger, 120,000, then 300,000. Without Soviet backing, the regime was paralyzed. On November 9, 1989, a confused East German official accidentally announced that travel restrictions to West Berlin were lifted. Immediately, thousands of East Berliners rushed to the wall. Border guards, with no orders to shoot, opened the gates. People poured through. Germans from both sides began attacking the wall with hammers and pickaxes, tearing down the symbol of division that had stood for 28 years. The Berlin Wall's fall triggered a domino effect. Within weeks, communist governments collapsed across Eastern Europe. Czechoslovakia's Velvet Revolution, Romania's violent overthrow of dictator Nicolae Ceausescu. By the end of 1989, the Iron Curtain was gone. The Soviet Union itself lasted 2 more years. In August 1991, communist hardliners attempted a coup against Gorbachev. They failed. The coup's failure accelerated the USSR's disintegration. One by one, Soviet republics declared independence. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. 74 years after Lenin's revolution, the world's first communist state was gone. The legacy. So what happened? How did an ideology that once controlled a third of humanity collapse so completely? Communism failed because it fundamentally misunderstood human nature and economics. Marx predicted that capitalism would destroy itself through inequality and exploitation. Instead, capitalism proved adaptable. Western nations implemented labor laws, social safety nets, and progressive taxation. Reforms that addressed workers' concerns without abolishing private property. Meanwhile, communism's central planning was economically disastrous. Without market prices, planners couldn't know what to produce or in what quantities. Without profit incentives, workers and managers had little motivation for efficiency or innovation. Without competition, quality suffered. The system bred corruption as party officials exploited their power for personal gain. But the deeper failure was moral and human. Communist regimes claimed to liberate workers, but instead created totalitarian police states. They promised equality, but created new hierarchies, where party membership determined privilege. They celebrated the people while slaughtering them by the millions. The human cost is almost incomprehensible. Historians estimate that communist regimes killed approximately 100 million people throughout the 20th century. The Soviet Union under Stalin and his successors, 20 million dead. Mao's China, 65 million dead. Cambodia's Khmer Rouge, in just 4 years, 2 million dead, a quarter of the country's population. Today, only 5 nations officially remain communist: China, Vietnam, Laos, Cuba, and North Korea. But even these have moved far from Marx's vision. China and Vietnam are capitalist in all but name, with thriving private sectors. Cuba slowly reforms. Only North Korea maintains truly orthodox communism and remains one of the poorest, most repressive nations on earth. The dream of a workers' paradise became the nightmare of the 20th century. Communism promised heaven on earth and delivered hell. Conclusion. The story of communism is ultimately a cautionary tale about the danger of utopian thinking. Marx genuinely believed he had discovered the scientific laws of history, that he had found the path to human liberation. His followers believed they were building paradise, but in attempting to remake human nature and society from scratch, communist regimes committed atrocities on an unprecedented scale. They prove that good intentions are not enough, that ideological certainty combined with absolute power is a recipe for catastrophe. Today, as we face new challenges and debates about economic systems, the lessons of communism remain vital. We must remember that freedom and prosperity cannot be decreed from above, that human rights matter more than utopian visions, and that any ideology claiming to have all the answers should be viewed with deep suspicion. The 20th century's grand experiment in communism failed. The question is, have we learned its lessons? That is the whole history of communism that I told you in this video. I hope that you like this video and also subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. And also share your perspective in the comments section.